All right. Boom. My name is Dr. Ed, and I'm just a geek kid who was shown mercy when he was caught cheating by his grade 7 French teacher. I grew up in the northeast hood of Calgary next to Pine Ridge, and you don't have to be a Calgarian to know why this community was nicknamed Crime Ridge. Creativity got me out of my slump and led me to my doctorate in computer science and over 15 years in educational technology. I'm here to give back as a speaker and diverse division making coach to innovative school districts and to cutting edge organizations. With increased automation and outsourcing, companies are embracing creative and diverse decision making as they're seeing themselves to help see themselves stand out in the market. Now, I help change leaders stand out in a globally competitive market. I was first exposed to social AI when I had a YouTube video of my research go viral in 2005. And I'm going to erase that. Since then, I've helped influencers make their yearly income monthly, and companies scale their business 3 times through unique positioning and viral marketing. We see phenomenal results when influencers and companies bring diverse ideas to the decision making table. And so join me as I rewrite live streaming with cinematic presence and the occasional lightsaber drawing. Yeah, I'm Dr. Ed, and during the parent teacher interview, my French teacher said, I know Ed's struggling, but he's creative, so it's okay. I'm going to give him some chances to show that creativity in school. And so, the most important thing that I learned in life is that there are no boring tasks, just boring imaginations. You see, creativity just doesn't apply to our interests, it applies to everything that we do. Yeah, I made mistakes, and I had to spend so many hours alone rewriting my work. But creativity pulled me through the darkest moments when I felt all hope was lost. I was never the same after my French teacher helped me rediscover creativity. I realized that creativity isn't only important for school, but it's also the key to success in business. As the global workplace becomes more competitive, you'll need a unique reason why customers will choose to work with you. And so the moral of this story is every unicorn discovered its uniqueness through creativity. Now, let's talk about isolation and what this has meant for me. Yeah, I have a massive passion for those who want to change the world. See, I come to empower influencers and businesses by treating technology as just another creative tool because there's a gap between the change that we need and the public awareness that we need to get there. See, when you put meaningfulness over money and transformation over transaction and conscientiousness over collection, it's not about you anymore. It transforms how you do business and how you run your life. If you're not sure why you're here, you walk with me and the path will become clear. You'll begin to see greater opportunities than you can imagine today. Because technology doesn't have to be a tool that amplifies hate and sedates the masses. If we use it to relate to the pains of others, like us, and to work together to blaze a new path forward. My name is Dr. Ed, and I'm here to empower a new generation of changemakers. And so, to give you a little bit of background, the background is I was in London. I was at the British Educational Technology Trade Show, or the BET Show. And during that time, this is the first conference that I had been to in 2 years. And you can imagine my excitement having been somebody who goes to conferences almost once a week per month prior to the pandemic. This was what I did. This was my job. This was my role. And suddenly all of that stopped. We did the online conferences. There were some heroic efforts that led us to do several very successful online conferences. And I really miss those times because there is this type of connection that you get with people in an online setting, in a face-to-face setting that you just can't get in the online setting. And it's mostly those casual, how are you doing? How is your family? And it's that relating. I feel like of all the technology that we have that has improved communication, it has distanced us from a relationship perspective. And so I value our connection a lot. And so when we had the opportunity to do an online conference, of course, I jumped at the opportunity. We were speaking every single day, probably 3 times, 2 to 3 times at least uh, each day. We give different talks. I was specifically talking about lessons that we had learned during the 2 years of lockdowns. And during this time, I had an opportunity to connect with so many people and learn so much from them. And I documented that experience. I shared some videos. They were kind of like highlight reels. Here's some of the things that happened during the day. I was recording for the first time with my new. So this isn't a new gimbal, but I was recording with the iPhone 13 Pro, and I was just trying out how does this recording work, and it was still I'm still learning about it, and I have to do like a whole session just on the technology behind the 13. They've really advanced the color science. And so I have to figure out how to handle like HDR footage and how to handle the some of the cinematic, like how it blurs the screen. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of new technology that we get to be exposed to because of what's available today, just in people's mobile phones. It's really incredible. And during this time, I also brought a different type of technology with me. And you've probably seen some videos of me with this before, and that is the Aranet 4. And what this is a carbon dioxide monitor. And so I've spoken with some people in the clean air crew about what this is and what it does. And the best explanation that I've heard is that it tells you how much carbon dioxide or rebreathed air is in your room. So typically when you're outside, it's something like 462, right? 462 ppm is just normal outdoors. And so in my room right here, you can see it's about 763. And that's good. We want to keep it below, say, 800, 1,000. We want to definitely keep it below 800 if we can indoors. This is part of the whole cleaning the air aspect. Because if there is something like a virus in the air, we get rid of it by just moving it out. And it took me a long time to figure out, like, well, what can I do at home in order to improve the air circulation? But that's something that I did focus on during this trip. And so I've had the monitor on during the whole conference, and I was looking at the levels of CO2 in the air. And it turns out that we had something closer to 600, like 600, like 500 to 600 ppm of CO2 inside the Bet Arena. And so that was really good. Like the levels there were very close to being outside. And if you consider it safe to be outside without having a mask on, you should also feel safe at the conference center not having a mask on as well. And so to me, I kind of want to run my life in a way that it's not completely blind. It's just like, oh, everybody's gonna get it. You know, we I want to run it with data. I want to know what we are running into. So for me, it's that awareness of, well, what is the actual situation, which is the most important to me, because I want to be able to make decisions for myself and our family as to what we feel safe with. And so, for example, my family will go camping outdoors, and we'll feel perfectly safe without our masks. And we do this all the time. And so, at what point do we feel safe indoors to travel without masks? And my feeling was, when you can get, like, according to the CDC levels of below 800 ppm, I think that we're getting to a point where it's pretty safe. But that's not always the case. That doesn't mean you won't get it, and that doesn't mean it's a perfect solution. You will be safer with a mask on. In the war against COVID, think about, like, masks as kind of like the shield, right? So when you're, say you're wearing an N95 mask, this is kind of like the shield, right? That it's kind of like the wall. I don't know if that's a proper analogy, but it's kind of like the wall. And vaccines are kind of like the soldiers, like working out the soldiers, like getting them stronger and cleaning the air. That's like flying airplanes and carpet bombing your enemy. So, no one solution is enough uh, to completely eliminate or eradicate the virus. It's the combination of the few. But apparently, air is like the one that, I don't know why, but people seem most resistant to. People generally don't believe that it works, and that may be the case. Like, but alone, it may not be enough to solve it. But I feel like we need to get towards a mask-free future. We can't, like, I don't envision us wearing it indefinitely. Perhaps at these peaks, when we're getting really close to, like, the next peak of Omicron, like, for example, the BA2 variant, then yeah, it makes sense. Like, we probably should wear masks indoors. Um, we have to assume that a lot more people have it. And so that was something that was a big learning for me, is that, yes, I feel like at some point, I do need to take the mask off, but I also need to consider the context and the conditions of, like, hey, we're kind of in, I think the UK at the time was kind of in a peak. So the risk was higher. But that said, I don't regret it, because I knew the situation moving in and I made a conscious decision. And you will make a different decision. You may agree, like, hey, maybe we need to have them on, but at the very least, you should also know the conditions. In fact, like, the biggest concern I had was the airplane itself. It was the airline, when they were, like, loading passengers and the accessory power was not on, so there was no ventilation, where the the CO2 ppm went from, like, 800 to 1,000 to almost 5,000 ppm. It's like the highest I've ever recorded was waiting, taxiing in an airplane. So I felt like, wow, that's crazy. Like, that is a huge amount. And it's not what I envision of, like, what good ventilation is in the aircraft. I think as passengers and as somebody who travels a lot on planes, I think we should have an expectation that more serious approaches to ventilation in airplanes is very important, especially when people are loading, because that's the highest risk time. Because normally you don't have every passenger pass by you, right? Like in a very close situation, except when they're loading. Then every, like, passenger behind you kind of goes through. And especially if you're in the, like, the business class seats at the front, then you have literally everybody on the plane pass by you during loading and unloading of the plane. And that's when you're at the highest risk of catching whatever anybody else on the flight has. And so it's this realization that, like, here, let me see if I can illustrate this. I don't know if this will work, but you're on the plane, okay? So this is the fuselage of the plane. And so here you've got the business class seats. And if everybody is entering through the front of the plane and they're going all the way to the back, then that means every single passenger is going to be exposed to that same air. And so you're hoping that they're wearing a mask that will avoid any kind of transmission. But if they are sick and they don't have a good mask on, then what you're going to have is transmission all over, right? So it's going to actually transfer one by one to every single seat. And so when you're reaching an environment of like 5,000 ppm of CO2, like we're talking about a huge amount of risk there. And so ultimately, I don't know where I got it. What I do know is I tested negative on the antigen tests. Like was required to do an antigen test before taking the flight, tested negative, and then a day later, a little bit more than 24 hours, yeah, I was positive. But it is possible, like because we don't have contact tracing these days, that I also got at the conference. But if that's the case, then I'm very impressed with all the people at the conference that didn't get it. And that said, you know what? These kinds of things happen. From there, the question is not, oh, what could I have done? But what are you doing now? And so that it leads me into the next step, where I want to talk a little bit about the air purifiers and a little bit about my approach. And so I do not have the perfect approach, but really my first step. Oh, and I should probably add this as well. So my first step was to what's the best way to show this? Yes. So I'll show you a few images, and hopefully this works. So to show you what this looks like. So this is the ventilation. So I have a number of intake vents in my home. So when I was isolating at home, this is what I did. I would cover most of the vents in the home using gaffer's tape. I like gaffer's tape because, especially this type, the Pro Gaff tape, because it doesn't leave like a weird residue afterwards. Oh, I'm coming in, zooming in, fun. So that is one approach. That's the kind of like the first step. And then the second step for me was then trying to separate the air from the basement where I'm staying, where I'm isolating, from the rest of the home. And so how do you do that? Like one of the biggest air gaps between the basement floor, and the top floors is the door, right? Is the door between the basement and the main floor. And so what I did there is I installed this silicone tape. So this is something that I learned, and so maybe I should add that as well. There's a few things that I need to add. Gaff tape. Yes, Pro Gaff tape. I love that stuff. And then silicone tape. So silicone tape is really interesting, like sealing, because it's got like a sticky 3M strip on one side, and I used these before when I had an outdoor. So basically, when I had a big draft from outside, I installed this tape on my front door, and what it did is actually removed a lot of the. Oops. Let's go back. It removed a lot of the drafts from outside, so it would like freeze, and I'd get like ice during the winter, and so just putting on this tape was enough to prevent that from happening. And so it really does a lot. And so I sealed the bottom, anywhere that there were air gaps, it's covering it, And I found that this allows me, what's nice is I still use the main floor for I still use the main floor for like eating, and so we're allowed to go back up, but we're supposed to like do it at different times. And so basically, I use that. I use the silicone seal tape allows me to open and close the door, and it separates the air at the same time. So I don't have to like let's say I could put a drop sheet like a piece of plastic on top, but then I'd have to remove the drop sheet every time, and then eventually the seal of that drop sheet would loosen over time. And so this allows me to do it without having that loosening over time. Okay, so I hope that one makes sense. So that was the other thing, and then one of the other things that I did because I started to notice that at home, on days where like I had the windows open, but on days where it was windy outside, it didn't work, right? And so it actually the ppm in like of CO2 in our house would rise to 1,000 or 1,030 or something. And so what I had to do is I had to move from passive cooling in the rooms to active cooling. And so active like ventilation to outside to the windows was the next step. And that's what allowed me to get to like 500 some ppm. And so it's kind of hacky what I did, but I mean, desperate times, desperate measures, right? So this is an example. So this is a like just a big tower fan. I just took the base off, and you can see that gaffer tape on the top, and it's just blowing air 24/7 outside. So that was one approach. And it helped. Like it moved, it just sucked out a lot of the air, the dirty air, uh, basically to outside of the house. And so that was very helpful. And then you can see like in the studio room, I just installed a small little fan, and it's just like a small desk fan, but it's on all the time and it pushes air out, which is I'm very thankful for because that also made a big difference. It also cools the room a lot. So it does get cold at night, so I do sometimes have to turn on the heaters. And so that gives you a sense of what this approach to actively ventilating outside. And to a certain extent, sometimes that's the best you can do is just like open a window. And if the window, like if it's really windy outside, sometimes you need active ventilation just to push the air out. And so that is something that really helped me get down from like 1,000 some ppm to about 500. And so the other thing, oh, I should also mention is so I have this timer, and the timer is used for the bathroom vents. And so I figured out a way to keep it on all the time. So normally I would just say like, oh, I only need the washroom ventilation for like an hour if I'm like taking a shower, for example. Well, if you press and hold the power button, then it will lock it on. And so we'll just keep it on all the time, which was very helpful. And the other thing I did is I do have um, an air purifier, like a HEPA air purifier at home. And what that is essentially like it just cleans the air. So essentially, if there is any virus or anything, this you can see that this vents straight to the upstairs because we're trying to keep the upstairs air as clean as possible. So as much as possible, like the air that is in the basement is trying to be cleaned so that when it goes up upstairs, then the minimum amount of like virus is transmitted. So that was my strategy. And so like essentially the approach that I've always used is that like technology is just this tool. It is not a perfect tool. Um, but it's a tool if we see it as like a tool for creativity. It allows us to get more information about the world around us, and it allows us to use it in new and novel ways. when we get to that point. Like if we need to do something, hey, we're trying to protect our family, we can use technology to help protect the ones that we love. And I think that really that's the key moral that I want to pass on to you today, is that technology for some people is this thing that, like, oh, I'm not a tech person, like I don't believe in tech, but it's not true. Like, you are a tech person. Like, you live in a society where you have heating, where you don't live in a cave. Like, you live with all sorts of modern technology. You go to a supermarket and you buy food. That's a type of technology as well. And so everyone is a technology person. Some people choose to not be creative with technology, and some people choose to be creative with technology. I'm one of those people who loves being creative with technology. And every time you watch a video from me, it's always going to be some kind of like creative or crazy idea involving technology. And today, I really wanted to focus on the invisible. I wanted to focus on like carbon dioxide monitors. Really wanted to focus on air cleaning because I feel like it's a type of tech. It's a type of tech that everybody should be familiar with. You should know what is the CO2 level, because what gets measured gets improved. You walk into a lot of rooms and you find, oh, it's just really hot, but it's not hot. Like, what you're feeling more often than not when you're in a crowded space is rebreathed air, right? What you're feeling is the heat that is coming out of the mouths of other people, and it's going directly onto your face. It's really gross if you think of it that way, and you should think of it that way. You want to avoid that, right? Like, that's something that at the end of this pandemic, what we should have learned is that we can improve things for everybody. If we had improved the air, you will feel more comfortable in an airplane. You won't get like super hot when you're loading and unloading passengers on an airplane. You won't get super hot, say, in a church, in the middle, like, because you'll find out, oh, like maybe the church doesn't have great ventilation. Maybe we should improve that. You improve ventilation, you actually increase the comfort for everybody who's there. And so don't be unaware. Like, we don't need to put our head in the sand and say, like, oh, well, everybody's going to get it. Oh, well, I'll retire eventually. I won't have to use this technology. Yeah, all that is just preventing, it's just shutting down like a whole domain of creativity for yourself. You don't need to be like that. You and you probably aren't. Like, I'm preaching to the converted, right? Like, if you're watching this, you're probably more into tech than the average Joe. And so I'd encourage you, whenever possible, encourage others to use technology, to be aware, to say, like, information, the more information that you have, like, information is power, right? Like, once you have that awareness, you will be able to improve your own life and the life of those that you care about the most. And that's the way I see it, is technology is not a it's not a thing that was meant to hurt you. It was not this thing that was meant to divide us, make us to amplify anger. But guess what? It turned out that anger was the most profitable thing for these companies, these social media companies, these news organizations who claim not to be news organizations, who claim that they don't have responsibility for the type of content that is on their platforms. It This type of use wasn't, if you look at like how technology was created, that's not how it was created. Like, these are I often think about like technology as being created by like these researchers with like really good ideals, like they're idealists. But then at some point along the lines, somebody discovers, wow, I can make a boatload of money by selling ads on this platform. And wow, I can make more money if I get them to pay more attention. And hey, it looks like everybody pays more attention when there's something that is highly divisive. It's like, okay, that's great. And so as a result, you get a society that's way more divisive. But if you are aware, just like if you're aware about the air, ha ha ha, what happened there? Just like if you're aware about the air situation, if you are aware about artificial intelligence and how that literally changes your perception of the entire world, if it changes your perception of politics, it changes your perception of what is right and what is wrong, then you're going to be way more at an advantage. You can take control of your own life. You can ignore the things that you see, the hate that you experience online. Oh man, like after this post that I had, which went viral, I think we got like 1,000, yeah, oh, like over 1,000 likes uh, on the post. People were like, "Oh, you were just an idiot," for not having a mask on. It's like, yeah, you're right. I probably was an idiot. But you know what? At least I was an idiot who was aware of the situation, as opposed to many idiots who are unaware of what the situation was. So I ran in consciously saying, at some point, I have to set some rules for my life as to when I'm going to wear a mask. Am I going to wear a mask forever? No, I don't. I don't see that as the reality. I want us to move towards a maskless future. I want us to move towards the technology that we are aware of what the situation is with the air in the places that we are at. And so the only way we're ever going to move towards a massless future is by being aware. Being aware. The only way that we're going to move towards a society where we stop using technology to sedate us, to make us more angry, and we start using it to relate with each other and to create and blaze a new path forward is by being aware of artificial intelligence, understanding how things go viral, why certain things go viral, and leveraging that. Why not? Leverage it for a good message. And that's what I did. Is I took the platform that I was given because of the anger that I experienced about the airplane ride that had 5,000 ppm. Me saying like this is completely ridiculous. Many people agreeing, um, and taking them through this whole journey of, yeah, this is my situation. This is how I'm dealing with it, as a opportunity to just talk about, this is the way I see, this is the way I approach things, this is the way I see the world. Is technology is just a tool for creativity. It's a tool to be used, and we should be looking at it in the same way. um yeah, so I hope that that was helpful for you. Of course, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Write them in the chat. Let me know if you found something that was interesting to you. And, you know, like I said, I'm Dr. Ed. I'm just a geek kid who was shown a little bit of mercy when he was caught cheating from his grade 7 French teacher. And I'm on a mission to help bring creativity through technology to the masses, and to especially the change makers, because there's a big gap between the change that we want to see and the public awareness that's going to give us the momentum to make that happen. And so, with that, that's my time for today. I want to thank you for visiting. If you want to learn a little bit more, you can just search Edward C. Thanks again.